A young woman sets out on a journey to find her missing brother who disappeared during a cattle drive. Along the way, she encounters a group of rugged cowboys who underestimate her. Proving her mettle, she not only earns their respect, but also finds romance with the leader of the group, who learns to appreciate her strength and determination. The desert sky stretched wide and endless above Eliza Hart, brushed with the early pinks and golds of dawn. A lonesome horizon unfurled ahead, scattering sagebrush and rock like frightened cattle crossing an invisible line. Eliza tightened her grip on the saddle horn of her bay mare, Heartfire, urging the horse on with a gentle pat. She was small, no taller than a ranch hand's shirt sleeve, but her eyes burned with a stubborn fire. Barely a whisper of wind touched the plains. The only sound was the faint creak of saddle leather and Heartfire's steady hoofbeats. She was just 12 years old the day her big brother Will vanished into the wild. Almost 10 years later, Eliza still carried that ache inside her, as if time had stopped at his goodbye. He had teased her once about crying over a skinned knee, saying she'd marry the first man who ever made her cry again. She never forgot that promise either. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from the morning chill nor from the ride, but from something older, a raw hunger rooted deep under her breastbone. She could taste it in the back of her throat, acrid and metallic, the taste of fear, of worry, and above all, of devotion. For a moment she could see Will's face, making that familiar grin, his warm voice bold in her ear. She swallowed the lump in her throat and drew her horse a little taller. "Find him," she whispered to the morning air, and the words hung between the long shadows of the mesquite trees. A wind kicked up loose dust at Eliza's heels as she trotted forward beneath the high sun. In the distance, a ribbon of movement appeared, men on horseback guiding a herd of cattle across the plains. The approaching dust plume grew larger by the second. By midday, the sky blazed a harsh blue overhead. The cattle drive emerged at the crest of a ridge. Eliza recognized the steady hum of the herds lowing and the creak of saddles all around. Each hoofbeat below matched the rhythm of her heart, steady, determined. She reined in Heartfire with a loud cluck, slowing her approach. A dozen cowboys sat in their saddles, weary figures stained with dust and sweat. Some shaded their eyes under broad black hats. Others rubbed their chapped necks or fiddled with gear. A rawhide rope coiled lazily at one rider's saddle horn, and silver spurs glinted at another's heels. The lead rider was a tall man on a black stallion, his broad-brimmed hat pulled down low and a silver star gleaming on his vest. "Howdy, miss," the leader called, spurring his horse a step nearer. His voice was low and steady like a distant waterfall. Jack Donnell's dark eyes studied Eliza for a moment as he waited. "Ain't often we see a young woman riding alone this far from home. What brings you on this trail?" Eliza fought the tremor in her voice, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "My brother Will," she said, voice firm despite the quiver. "He was riding with a cattle drive heading west, and when it ended, he never came home. I'm trying to find him." A murmur ran through the cowboys behind him. Eliza saw the men exchange curious glances, their suspicion and surprise blending. Jack Donnell tipped his weathered hat. "Name's Jack Donnell," he said calmly. "Heard a lot of folks' kin run off with cattle drivers. Ain't no job for children. You know what you're doing, Miss Hart?" "I'm old enough, sir," she replied, standing straighter in the saddle now. Jack's eyebrows shot up. Then he let out a low laugh. "By the sun, you look young, Miss Hart," he said, raising an eyebrow. The other cowboys chuckled and exchanged knowing grins. She may ride as well as any of them, but there was no mistaking that she was still barely more than a girl in their eyes. Jack Donnell smiled thinly. "Well then, come along," he said. "Out here, sometimes kin needs somebody riding behind them." He flicked his reins, motioning for Eliza to lead Heartfire forward. The cowboys cleared a path, and one by one tipped their hats as she fell into line with the herd. Still, wary looks remained on their faces. They had never had a woman on their drive, and they were curious what she might do for them. They settled into the rhythm of the drive by afternoon. Eliza admired the seasoned riders ahead, their figures steady in the saddle as they guided cattle across the sweeping plains. Each man and horse moved together as if part of one well-oiled machine. Occasionally, a cowboy would lift his head and hum a slow ballad, and the others would tap their saddles along to the tune. Heartfire stepped steadily under Eliza, and with the sinking sun even, she felt the familiarity of the trail begin to soothe her racing thoughts. By the time they camped for the night, the ranch hands had pitched their blankets under the wide sky. For hours after supper, the cowboys sat around the dying campfire, trading stories under the starry sky. Boone leaned back with a grin and began a tall tale about a phantom rider who haunted a dry riverbed out east, lost on moonlit nights. Even Jack, usually quiet after dark, added chilling details, the cold wind that whispered through the rocks and the distant sound of galloping hooves belonging to no mortal horse. Eliza listened, wide-eyed, as flames cast flickering shadows around them. When the story ended, the men laughed softly and stared thoughtfully into the embers. The vast prairie night felt both boundless and strangely warm. Eliza leaned into her blanket, comforted by the shared tales and the crackling fire. Later, Eliza walked a short distance from the campfire and found a smooth rock to sit on. The moon cast silvery light across the quiet plains, and the Milky Way arched overhead. Crickets chirped softly among the sagebrush, and a warm breeze rustled the trees. She thought of her parents and the ranch she grew up on, and of the promise she had made. Above, a bright star flashed as if on cue, and she couldn't help but feel it was a sign that they were on the right path. For a moment, she allowed herself to quietly wish that they would find Will safe, and that maybe, just maybe, this journey would not be in vain. Reassured by the calm night sky, Eliza returned to the campfire feeling oddly hopeful. By twilight, the group had set up camp. The men laid out blankets around a crackling fire and picketed their horses to nearby mesquite trees. The air turned cool and clear, the sky black as velvet above. Jack stirred the coals and brewed 2 mugs of strong coffee in a tin pot. Passing one to Eliza, he nodded toward the herd grazing quietly beyond the firelight. "Keeps your eyes sharp if you have a clear head," he said softly. "Drink up." The coffee was bitter enough to wake the dead, but Eliza drank it down in 2 steady gulps. Some of the men spat tobacco and pulled their worn hands free from the leather reins. Boone, the grizzled cowboy with the bristling moustache, let out a low whistle. "You reckon she'll last a week out here?" he drawled to the ring of riders, amusement tugging at his lips. Eliza only smiled, her gaze steady as the firelight danced in her eyes. If this was a test, she was determined to pass it. Outside the circle of light, the prairie held its secrets, coyotes howling in the distance, stars unblinking overhead. Somewhere out there, her brother was waiting, and she would not fail him. Early the next morning, as the cowboys bustled about breaking camp, a sudden commotion broke the calm. A stray steer, spooked by something in the brush, bolted from the herd. Its lariat whipped free and tangled a horse, sending both creatures spinning in a chaos of hooves and dust. Without hesitating, Eliza spurred Heartfire forward. In one swift motion, she reached down, caught the tangled rope in her hands, and expertly looped it around the steer's horns. The animal thundered on for a few frantic yards, then sputtered and fell to its knees, subdued. "Hell's bells, where'd you pick up a trick like that?" Boone called, astonished. A round of cheers broke out among the riders as they crowded around to see. Eliza offered a shy grin, still catching her breath. "My brother taught me a trick or 2, sir," she said softly. Jack chuckled as he rode up. "Hell, I never doubted you could ride, Miss Eliza. Your brother's a proud man if he knew this." He tipped his hat and smiled. The other cowboys whistled in admiration and slapped Eliza on the shoulder. For the first time, she felt like one of them. Jack cleared his throat and spoke quietly as the camp settled again. "Listen here," he said. "Word out of Laredo is that some rustlers east of here hit a cattle drive not far from this valley a few nights back, tore through the camp, stole off with the herd, and one rider never turned up. I don't rightly know if it was your brother or not, but it's the kind of trouble that might be tied to him. We ought to go check it out, see what we can find." Eliza's heart leapt. "Yes, sir. I want to help," she said, voice trembling with hope. "I have to find him." Jack nodded once. "Then we ride at first light," he replied firmly. "I'll stand with you, Eliza. We'll ride together." At first light, Jack signaled the men to fan out along the narrow canyon trail. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge and came to a stop. Below lay the blackened remains of a camp. Charred timbers, warped pans, and twisted wagon wheels were strewn across scorched sagebrush. The skeletons of half a dozen cattle littered the ground, bleached white in the sun. A heavy stillness hung over the scene. Eliza's breath caught. Beneath a pile of ashes and a burned canvas sack, something glittered in the sun. Heartfire poured at the dirt, dislodging more charred debris. Eliza knelt and began sifting through the ashes. Her fingers closed around a cold, familiar shape. She lifted it into view, a silver pocket watch, its chain tangled in blackened rope and dirt. The face was cracked, but the initials were clear, YH, her brother's initials. Eliza collapsed to her knees, clutching the watch to her heart, her vision blurred with tears of hope and relief. Jack was at her side in an instant, kneeling in the dust beside her. "Eliza," he said gently, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We found a clue. That means he's alive somewhere. I promise we'll find him." Wiping her tears on her sleeve, Eliza looked up at Jack. He lifted her chin with a thumb. "That's right, kid. We found a clue, so we ride on," he said firmly. "Now let's saddle up and not lose any ground." Eliza quickly remounted Heartfire, resolve stealing in her chest. Soon the horses were ready. They set off down the canyon's dusty trail, hearts pounding. Eliza sat taller in her saddle, dread replaced by determination. Each rider followed a faint line of broken branches and hoof prints, clues left by the rustler's passage. The sun was climbing higher as they pushed deeper into the wilderness, the track growing fainter with each bend. The canyon walls narrowed and the air grew tense. Around a bend, Eliza spotted the flicker of a campfire near a rocky outcrop. She nudged Jack's arm and pointed. He signaled for silence. From behind a craggy outcrop, they peered into the firelight. 3 rough-looking outlaws sat around the flames, rifles laid across their knees. And there, slumped against a log at the edge of the light, was her brother. Will hands bound, eyes closed. Eliza's heart thundered in her chest. They had found him. Jack gave a sharp nod and drew his pistols. "On my word," he whispered. In the next instant, Jack and Boone sprang from cover, guns blazing. Jack roared, "Here we go!" The night erupted into chaos. Bullets cracked against stone. One outlaw howled as he was struck. The others scrambled up, firing wildly into the darkness. Eliza gripped Heartfire and hunched down, peering through the swirl of smoke. The gunfire was fierce but brief. Under Jack's rapid commands, the cowboys returned fire. One outlaw fell with a grunt. The other 2 bolted into the darkness. Eliza pressed Heartfire closer as the smoke cleared. Suddenly she saw Will stir. His eyes fluttered open and confusion gave way to relief as Jack and Boone chopped through his ropes. "Will!" Eliza cried out, breaking from cover. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his shoulders. Will swayed on his feet but clung to her. "Eliza, thank God," he whispered. She pressed her hand to his forehead, brushing away sweat and soot. "You're safe now," she whispered fiercely. Around them, Jack and the others formed a protective circle as the last echoes of gunfire faded into the night. When the outlaws finally fled, Jack signaled Boone to fetch bandages. Eliza remained kneeling beside her brother. He was dust-covered and bruised, but alive and surprisingly alert. She gently wiped ash from his face and tore a corner of her skirt to bind the worst of his cuts. Will managed a weak grin as he felt her trembling hands. Boone poured cool water into a tin cup and passed it to Will with one hand while offering Eliza the other. Jack watched quietly, pride and relief softening his stern expression. "You did good, kid," he said quietly. Will took a sip of water and squeezed Eliza's hand. That night, Eliza and her brother joined the others under the open sky. A new fire crackled between them. Will leaned back against a blanket-covered saddle and finally drifted into sleep, exhausted but safe. Eliza settled beside the flames, still shaken but grateful. Across the fire, Jack sat on a log staring into the glowing embers. Hesitantly, she approached and sat down beside him. Eliza cleared her throat softly. "Jack, I want to thank you," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." He turned to her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of her hair behind her ear. "Eliza," he began in a low voice, "I've seen plenty of riders in my day, but I've never met anyone like you. You were brave when I was not, and steady even when I needed it. You remind me of someone I lost a long time ago." His voice caught for a moment. "If I'm honest,
I've been stumbling through this life for a while, until I met you." Eliza's eyes glistened as she listened. He spoke of dusty memories and quiet regrets of a family he once had. When he paused, she softly admitted, "I've lost someone too, Jack." The night air held its breath. Slowly, under the watchful stars, they let their hands find each other between them. The crackle of the fire and the hush of the canyon surrounded them in a small private world. Finally, Jack took her hand in both of his. "Eliza," he whispered, voice thick with feeling, "stay with me if you want. He struggled to speak, instead gently brushing his thumb across her knuckles. Eliza smiled and leaned forward. In the stillness of that night, their lips met in a warm, grateful kiss. By dawn, an easy calm had settled over the camp. Eliza's brother slept peacefully in the wagon, and the other cowboys were stirring and packing their gear. Jack rose and offered Eliza his hand. As she stood, they both turned to watch the pale sunrise together. Side by side, they mounted their horses once more. Eliza felt lighter than she had in years. At dawn the next morning, Jack led the procession back onto the dusty trail. Eliza and Will were by his side. Will rode a gentle gelding given by Boone. It was slow but steady. Eliza mounted Heartfire and kept pace at Will's shoulder. The sun's rays spilled gold across the plain as they rode. Every clop of hoof stirred memories in Eliza's mind. She shared a piece of jerky with Will, and he offered her a crooked grin. The world felt quiet and safe now that they were all together. The next day, the herd pressed on toward home. The tall grasses rustled in warm breezes. Will's strength slowly returned. He even teased Eliza about how she might owe him a rematch at breaking wild horses someday. By midday, they reached a small creek where the horses drank deeply. Eliza cupped water for Will and took some for herself. The group exchanged stories of journeys past as they rested. When night fell, Jack handed Eliza a harmonica that had belonged to his own brother. She played a gentle tune from her childhood. Will and Jack joined softly, and soon the cowboys hummed along. It felt like a family reunion in the wilderness. By the third sunrise, they were riding through familiar country. The open land stretched ahead, dotted with craggy outcrops and distant mesas. At a midday rest, Jack nudged Eliza. "You did it," he said quietly as they watched Will trotting happily among the cattle. Eliza allowed herself a small smile of pride. That night, Eliza returned to sit by Jack's fire. Will had already drifted to sleep, wrapped in blankets. Eliza looked at Jack and saw in his face the same warmth she felt. "We go home tomorrow," she whispered. Jack only nodded gently. They both understood the weight of those words. One sweltering afternoon, the herd paused in a dusty ravine. Eliza loosened the girth on Heartfire's saddle and looked around. Nothing but scrub and rocks as far as the eye could see. Then something caught her attention, a flash of yellow and black. A roadrunner darted across the trail ahead, pausing to eye her curiously. Intrigued, Eliza nudged Heartfire forward. The bird seemed to beckon her, leading her to a hidden spring trickling out of the rock. She cupped her hands to drink, smiling as cool water washed grit from her throat. Will and the other cowboys thanked the bird quietly. The land still held its surprises, and even small wonders like this renewed their hope. Later that evening, after they had camped for the night, Jack wandered over to Eliza as she tended the fire. Abe and Boone joined quietly. Jack nodded once at Eliza and said softly, "You did good today, Miss Eliza." The other cowboys murmured agreement. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. It was more praise than she was used to, and she found herself laughing as she shook her head. "Just doing what I gotta, mister," she replied with a grin. Jack's eyes crinkled in a rare smile. For the first time, Eliza felt like her efforts truly meant something to these men. For days they travelled in silence. Each morning Eliza found herself whispering a vow to the rising sun. "We won't fail him again." Once, at a rocky stream, she paused to wash Will's face and reflected on how much they had been through. Every sunrise brought new challenges, but also proved she could meet them. One night, as camp settled under the stars, she realized the rider in the reflection of her horse's eye was not the frightened girl who set out. She was a hard-won, determined woman now. When the cattle drive finally neared the valley of home, Eliza felt a swell of relief. The next morning she woke early to help saddle the horses.
She stood in the pink dawn light and realized how much she had changed on this journey. Jack offered his hand to steady her as she climbed back into the saddle, and Eliza took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. As they rode out toward her ranch, Will riding contentedly between them, she knew this road was not the same as before, but together, stronger, unbroken, they would ride it as one. By midday, a patch of green appeared on the horizon. Eliza urged Heartfire a little faster, excitement surging through her veins. Will pointed from the wagon. "See? Trees," he exclaimed softly. Indeed, a grove of cottonwoods nestled by a riverbank, the first sign of her home territory. Eliza laughed and let Heartfire break into a trot. The other cowboys picked up speed too, carried forward by the sudden hope. Jack rode alongside her. "We made it back," she whispered, voice full of relief. When they finally reached the dusty crossroads near Eliza's ranch, the men gathered to say goodbye. Each cowboy shook Eliza's hand with genuine warmth. Boone gave her a hearty whoop and told her to stop by the ranch any time. Jack stood back, tipping his hat respectfully as Eliza led her brother away. Eliza turned once and waved as Will called out, "See you soon!" Jack watched them until they disappeared over the rise. He exhaled slowly and pulled his hat low against the setting sun. The following morning, Eliza woke before the sun. She saddled Heartfire quietly and walked to the wagon where her brother still slept. Jack appeared quietly beside her, a hand on her horse's bridle. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, looping an arm under Will's to steady him. With a gentle gesture from Jack, they headed down the road to gather the cattle. Eliza glanced at Jack once more, and he smiled reassuringly. Even after such darkness, there was comfort in this new partnership. That night, as Eliza finally lay down in her own familiar bedroll, she felt a contented warmth in her chest. Will was safe at last, and Jack's quiet promise echoed in her mind. Outside, the stars twinkled down gently upon the ranch they had journeyed from, sending slivers of moonlight through the cabin window. Eliza closed her eyes and let a smile spread across her face. Sleep came easily for the first time in days, her heart at peace knowing that tomorrow would dawn bright with new possibilities. The sun rose on the most ordinary day, and yet everything had changed for Eliza Hart. She drew in a deep breath of the crisp morning air, her gaze meeting Jack's one last time. In the soft light, Jack tipped his hat with a smile. Eliza returned it, a grin tugging at her lips. No words were needed. They both understood the journey ahead would no longer be one she travelled alone. Together, they had turned a desperate quest into the beginning of a true partnership. In the years to come, Eliza would retell the story of this journey around her own campfire. She would speak of rattlesnakes and rustlers, of kind strangers, and the man who became more than a captain to her. But for now, as she slept, the only promise she heard was the steady beat of her brother's heart next to her and Jack's protective presence at her side. Tomorrow's sun would bring a normal day, but tonight she let herself dream of new adventures and the family she had gained. Eliza Hart had promised her brother she would bring him home, and she did. In the process, she found something more, her own strength and the heart of a new family. As the dawn broke over the endless Wild West sky, with Jack riding at her side, she was ready for whatever came next. After all she had been through, this sunset was just the beginning.